everyone, welcome back to Featherstitch House. My name's Rebecca and each week on this channel I make videos about embroidery and textile art to help you get creative. We're on week 3 of our November Winging It panel. If you're not sure about Winging It, it's a year-long project where we improvise a piece of textile art each week. Now this year we've been creating a wall hanging built of a panel that we stitch throughout each month. And those panels reflect things that are happening in the world around us and in our own lives as we move through 2024. For November, we've been thinking about hibernation, and over the last couple of weeks, we've used thread painting techniques, really simple thread painting techniques, to create a hibernating creature. Now, I've created a hedgehog. I've seen some lovely versions in our Facebook group, and there's information about that in the description below. But I've also seen some other creatures from around the world creeping in as well, which has been an absolute joy to see. It can be intimidating trying thread painting, but I promise you it's really straightforward the way that we've done it. We're just using straight stitch, and because we've chosen a really textured animal, that covers a multitude of sins. We don't need our stitching to be perfect. So today we need to allow our hedgehog to go to sleep. And to do that, he needs a comfortable bed to sleep in. And so we're going to create our background around the hedgehog and give him a bed of leaves. We're going to be doing a little bit of painting today, as well as some applique and embellishment. So I hope that sounds like something you're up for. You know what to do, gather your bits and pieces and let's get stitching.
Look at these beautiful leaves. These are just a handful that I collected from my garden and from a walk that I went on with Rick last weekend. Our daughter was on a sleepover, so we had the opportunity to go out uninterrupted and just have a wander around. We went to Clumber Park. It's a National Trust property in the UK. Highly recommend. There's a beautiful walk around the lake, and I just picked up a couple of leaves that stood out to me and went into my garden this morning and had a look at what was there. And I hadn't really realised, I kind of knew, but I hadn't really realised how much evergreen we've got in our garden. Nearly everything is evergreen because I like plants all year round, but we have the most incredible copper beech tree in our back garden, and I love how the leaves, they're sort of a dark red in summer, and when the light shines through them you can see the green chlorophyll in there, because it is there, otherwise they wouldn't be able to photosynthesize. But their leaves go through stages of brownness, so this is a lightest brown and then it starts curling and going a dark shade of brown, and they finish up this almost leather colour, and they're all curled up and gorgeous. I like the backs as well. They're so shiny. I don't know if the camera's picking it up. So shiny. No idea what this is. I think it's beech again, but I picked this up off the ground at Clumber Park. Just loved the sort of russety orange brown colour. And then this is a sycamore. Love how sycamores go really yellow. Sycamores are part of the maple family, so you might think this is a maple leaf. It's part of the same family of trees, and they go bright yellow but get these lovely speckles on them, which I think is just fabulous. Then I've got an Acer, which again is part of the maple family, Japanese Acer, and it's a dark red in the summer, but in the autumn it goes this really sort of fiery red and just looks gorgeous. So that's as the leaf starts to turn, and then they crumple up and shrivel and get this lovely sort of crackly quality to them. Just think they're fab. This I pulled off a little shrub that I've got in my garden, can't remember what it's called, but it's got pinkish yellow leaves in the summer and just looking lovely. And these I picked up just because of the markings on the leaf, how gorgeous those markings are. So you've got this undertone of yellow with these splashes of brown and then these almost scorch marks that I think are so fabulous. And then here is an oak leaf. It's quite a big oak leaf, super shiny, leathery brown, loads of speckles and markings. And I love how the veins stand out all the more in autumn as well. I think they just look fabulous. And then more matte on the back. How amazing is that? So that's just a little selection. If I went for a walk around my village, I'm sure I could find more, but I thought that would give us some inspiration for a colour scheme. So this is where we've got up to so far in our November panel. We have been working in a hoop. I've taken it out of the hoop now, and we've been using some simple thread painting techniques to create a hedgehog. And it's been so lovely seeing your versions coming up on social media. I know it's really hard to share publicly when you aren't confident or when you're just starting your stitching journey, sometimes even when you're quite far down the road on your stitching journey. I think it took me about 3 years before I was willing to post anything on social media, and I just think, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It really means the world to me to see what you've been making. So our hedgehog is just floating in a white space at the moment, and our theme for the month is hibernation. So he needs a bed, and there are loads of ways you can do this. So I'm just going to suggest some ways initially, because I'm going to do my version, mainly because I don't feel very confident doing any of the others. But I was thinking about it this morning and thought this would be a great one to use some eco printed fabric or some rust dyed fabric. Now, I've never done eco printing, I've never done rust dyeing. Maybe that's something I need to try out next year. Watch this space. But this would be a lovely panel to use some eco printed fabrics. You could, if you wanted to, take some leaf prints, use some like poster paint or acrylic paint, dab your leaf in and print all around. You could also use actual leaves if you wanted to. So if you coat them with wax, I've still got my jar of wax ready from when we did our batik back in July, but if you paint these with wax, it will preserve them a little bit, and you could then actually stitch these actual leaves onto your panel if you wanted to, and surround your hedgehog with real leaves. So there's loads and loads of ways that you could do it. I'm going to use a couple of techniques that we've already tried out this year. I'm going to combine them. So I'm just going to clear my leaves away initially and get myself set up for stage 1. Okay, I have got my perspex down, so please don't be alarmed about my wool mat because it's protected. And I've got some water here, I've got my watercolours out, and I've got these metallic watercolours. These are, I don't know if they're still available, I've had these quite a long time. The Gansai Tambi Starry Colours, and they are lovely shades of gold, and I'm hoping I can get some shimmer going in here. So I've got some colours that are reminiscent of the leaves that I've collected, and I'm just going to draw out some pigment. I'm not going to go overboard, and I don't want this to be too wet, but I'm just going to blotch some colour around. just to take away the white, and I'm not going to be too fussy. I don't want to water my paint down too much. I'm just going to put some sort of blobs of pigment. So if it's too thick, you can add a dab more water and spread it out. But I'm just going to surround my hedgehog with some autumn colours in little blobs. So if you don't want your hedgehog to be stained with the pigment, you need to not go too close to him and keep your brush fairly dry when you do get closer. So I'm using quite thick pigment here and just adding a bit of water to spread it out. But when I'm close to my hedgehog, here we go, let's be brave, I'm going to just stop a little bit shy. And I can blend those colours out away. So I've left a little bit of white, but the paint is travelling in just enough to take that white border away. A lot of this will be covered because we're going to do some applique as well. So don't agonise too much because we just want some colour on our background. As long as you've got a little bit of moisture in your fabric, those pigments will blend together and merge, and you'll get these lovely kind of watery marks, and that's perfect because it's been mostly grey so far through November. It happens to be quite a nice day today. Here in Lincolnshire the sun's out a little bit. Has been this morning, but it has been very grey so far. And so let's see what happens if we get some of this more gold paint on. I'm hoping that oh yeah, that's standing out really nicely. So I'm just going to dab some of this shimmery watercolour paint over the surface, and I'll get some different shades of gold in. I'm hoping that I think it's mica powder in the paint. I'm using it straight from the pan, just with that water that we sprayed on that's just activated the surface of the paint. I will move it in a minute so that you can see. I've got a more yellowy gold here. Don't forget that watercolour always dries lighter than it appears, because once the water has disappeared and evaporated away, you're just left with the pigment, and the water obviously makes everything look darker initially. Okay, so if I bring it up close, I'm hoping that if I move it around, you can see some of that shimmer on the surface. So we've got loads of that mica powder pigment sitting on the surface. It's actually very subtle. As the colours have dried, it's looking a lot more subtle, a lot paler, but I think we've captured our autumn colour from our leaves. So what I'm going to do now is use the fabric printing technique that we used back in August. So I'm going to use my fabric attached to paper. I'm going to put it through my printer and I'm going to scan these leaves. So I'm just going to lay them on my printer. I've got a flatbed scanner printer copier, and I'm just going to scan them and print directly onto the fabric. If you're not sure about this technique, I will link the August video where I did it. You can scan the image and manipulate it a little bit if you want to, but you can just scan direct, like by almost like photocopying the leaves, so you can do that onto fabric. I'm going to use some spray adhesive, which is like a quilt basting adhesive. So it's called 505 temporary adhesive. You need the temporary one so you can peel the fabric off. I'm going to spray it on a piece of A4 card that goes through my printer, and then I'm going to smooth a piece of this backing fabric that I've been using onto it, and you need to make sure it's completely flat with no crumples or creases, and then you trim it back to the edge of the card and put it in your printer. Try and use the manual feed option if you can. I think you can use it in a laser printer, but I'm going to use it in my inkjet printer because that's what I've done before. The only thing to be aware of with that is that the inkjet printer will not be permanent, so you won't be able to wash this or get it wet because you'll move the ink around from the print. So I'm going to do that and I'll show you the printed fabric when I've done it. So just to show you the fabric set up, this is it. So if I just tilt it, you should be able to see some of the fabric texture there. It's card on the back. I took it outside because the glue goes everywhere and makes everything sticky. Giving it a really good spray, making sure I've sprayed right up to the edges as well, and then I just smooth the fabric over so that there are no lumps and bumps in it, and I've trimmed it back with a rotary cutter so that it's right to the edge. There's no overlaps at all, and I can make sure that it's the right way up and just feed that through my printer and it will print onto fabric just fine. So I'm off to do that now. Okay, well, that was fun. I love doing things like this. I've got some tips for you. So this is my print onto fabric. I promise it's on fabric. That's my print of my leaves, and I did a little bit of trial and error on paper before I brought the fabric in, and discovered that the best way to do it to get the best finish was to just attach the leaves. So I've just used a little bit of stick glue and I've just attached them to a piece of paper or card that's the same size as what I'm printing onto, and that meant that they didn't move and they weren't folded up, and I could make sure I could fit everything on the bed of the scanner, because when I put the lid down before doing this, it moved some of the leaves and they printed out all overlapping. So that's how I did it. That's my tip. Right, so here's my printout. The colours are a little bit more muted, they always are, but it's not a problem. I really don't mind that at all. Now I think I'm going to get a better cut if I leave it attached to the paper before I cut it out. I'm not going to show you me cutting all of these, we'll be here all day. So what I'm going to do, I've got a fairly sharp pair of paper scissors and I'm just going to cut one out, and then I'm going to fussy cut around it. I'm using paper scissors because obviously I'm cutting through the paper as well as the fabric. And I want to get the little zigzag edge on the leaf cut out as well. So I'm being quite careful in the way that I'm cutting this out. And I might have a little bit of white fabric showing, but it's really not the end of the world. I like that you get the shadows as well. I'm going to cut those off though. And you can choose whether or not to have any of the leaf stem. I'm going to leave mine on. So just cut around that leaf. So that's the first one, and just to prove that it is fabric, I'm going to just peel away trying to get hold of it. There we go. Just going to peel away that fabric. So we essentially made a fabric sticker, really. There we go. And there's our fabric. It is ever so slightly tacky, so I can bring it in and attach it. I can just pop that on there and it will sit around my hedgehog. So I'm going to cut the rest out and then I'll come back when I've done that, because watching me cut really slowly cannot possibly be entertaining viewing. So I'm going to do that and then we'll arrange them and we'll do some stitching. I'll be back soon. Okay, I've cut out all of my leaf prints and I've kind of roughly arranged them, and I didn't want to use a matte thread, so I've dug around in my stash and found these machine embroidery silks. I don't think they're silk, I think it's polyester, but they've got a lovely sheen to them, and I'm not usually into shimmer, but because we've put some of this gold watercolour on our background, I thought it might be nice to bring a bit more of that in. So I don't have any dark brown, these are just the colours that I've got, and I thought we could stitch them down using a bit of shimmer. Now if you haven't got anything like this, if you have metallic threads, they would work, although they are a bit of a nightmare to work with. These are as well. You can see how curly they are, so they often want to work against you. I'll see how I get on. It might drive me sufficiently mad that I can't bear it, but we'll do what we can. And I want to pin things down first of all. So I've got my trusty Kiwi wrist pincushion. Kits are available on our website if you want one of these of your own, and I'm just going to put some pins to hold these in place. Now I don't want to be too enthusiastic with the pins because I'm hoping to get a bit of a ripple into these. You can see as I've peeled them off they've curled up a little bit, and I want to maintain that as much as I can. So I've just roughly arranged them. I'm covering up some of the edges of the hedgehog. I've done that deliberately. We want him tucked away inside his bed of leaves. I'm going to bring that one in a little bit. I'm just going really gently, and I want some space because we're going to add some more to this next week before we put our border on. So we've got our colour there in the background, we've put our leaves on, and what I thought we could do is I'm just going to ripple up the leaf a little bit like that. It's not going to be totally proud because we're going to add some stitching. I've run out of pins. Okay, so what I thought I would do is stitch along the leaf veins, and you could do this in whatever way you like. I think I'm going to start simple and just do a running stitch. And we're not using really sparkly thread, it's just got a bit of sheen, and so I think hopefully it'll be subtle enough not to be too blingy. If you want to go blingy, but if you've been around for a while, you know that's not my style really. So really simple stitches for this one. Gone up the middle vein first of all, and already you can see that's getting a little bit of pucker. I can pull that thread a little bit tighter if I want to, and that's going to pucker it up even more. So I'm just going to stitch away. I'm going to leave the camera running, and I promised last week that I would share a poem, and this has been the cause of, I'm just going to take that off now, great consternation in our house this week, because the poem that I've chosen is a little bit sad, and I told Rick a little bit about it and he was horrified that I was going to share such a grim poem, but it isn't really grim. It starts bad and ends up in a much more positive and hopeful way, so bear with me. I have got a fun one for the end just in case Rick was right, but I'm confident that he isn't, because I don't think we always have to be like warm and fuzzy, do we? Sometimes poetry is important to address quite serious things, and so that's what I'm doing. So the poem is by Philip Larkin. Now, if you haven't heard of Philip Larkin, he's quite famous in the UK, but if you're watching elsewhere in the world, you might not have heard of him. And he is renowned for being really quite miserable. He wrote a very famous poem. I won't read it. It's got a very strong curse word in the first line, and it's about the effects of parents. You won't have to search very far before you find it. But he's actually quite local to me, both in my early life and in my life in Lincolnshire. So he was born in Coventry, which is just down the road from where I grew up, and he went to the University of Oxford, and pretty much as soon as he graduated he got a job at the University of Hull, which is just up the road from me now in Lincolnshire, and he worked there as a librarian pretty much until he retired. That's all he ever did. He never married, although he did have a partner for most of his life, but he never got married, he never had children, he never owned a passport, he never left the UK, and lived quite a simple life. He was offered the role of poet laureate, so I think other countries have poet laureates as well. They're basically the state poet. He was offered that role after John Betjeman died, and he actually turned it down because he felt that it would essentially cramp his style and would limit the kinds of things that he would feel free to write about if he held or had held that role. And so he let it go and carried on writing poetry. And although he was known as a bit of a curmudgeon, he actually writes some really profoundly sensitive poetry, and there's often a hint of melancholy in his poems, and I feel like it's kind of appropriate. I love the way that's working. Look at that, it looks real. I think it's kind of appropriate for this time of year where everything feels like it's diminishing and dying off, and although we have all the coziness and we have all the fun, and the fun of, in America you've got Thanksgiving, we have bonfire night here, and we have the beginnings of preparations for Christmas and all that sort of thing, you can't get away from the fact that summer is most definitely over. The birds are leaving and going off to warmer parts, and things are dying off in the garden, and there's a stillness and a quietness that comes over the world in autumn. And so I think this poem lands for us in a number of ways. So I'm going to read it. Brace yourselves. It starts in a very sad way. So it's called The Mower by Philip Larkin. I'm laughing because I'm worried that you're going to hate it, but I trust you. I keep being told to do more poetry, so this is what that means. You can let me know in the comments if you want the poetry to stop after this one. Anyway, let's stop procrastinating and avoiding the issue, and let's read it. So this is The Mower by Philip Larkin. The mower stalled twice. Kneeling, I found a hedgehog jammed up against the blades, killed. It had been in the long grass. I had seen it before, and even fed it once. Now I had mauled its unobtrusive world unmendably. Burial was no help. Next morning I got up, and it did not. The first day after death, the new absence is always the same. We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. So, really poignant poem. And I read it, I'd not come across it before, and I was looking for poems about hedgehogs, and they are few and far between, let me tell you. There's lots of children's poems about hedgehogs, but not really anything really chunky and meaningful, and this one just got me right in the gut, because there's a sadness at the start. He's just going about his daily life, doing his chores, getting on with the things that he needs to do, and without knowing it, he's carelessly caused the death of this innocent, quiet little creature that was just doing its own thing in the grass. And he refers back to a time that he fed the hedgehog once, and I think that speaks of his good intentions, that the fact that perhaps in the past he's eased his conscience by putting food out for the hedgehog, but he only did it once, so he probably told people at work how he fed hedgehogs and looked after nature. And sometimes we do one-off things that absolve our conscience, don't we? And they make us feel a little bit better about things, but we don't keep them up. But because we've ticked it off our list, that will do, and we go about our lives, and lives get busy, and we start taking less care, and then sometimes something will happen that brings us up short. So for the poet here, he's been mowing his lawn, and you can imagine the scene where he's getting really frustrated with the lawnmower because it keeps cutting out, and he just wants to get on with his day and do his job. And when he looks down, probably cursing and kicking the mower and really angry that the mower has let him down, he discovers that actually the fault is his. And had he been more careful, there wouldn't have been a problem with the mower, and this innocent little creature would still be alive. And I think at the beginning of that poem, you get the sense that he could go either way with this. He could not care, he could still be frustrated. Stupid hedgehog got him away. Or he can let that moment land and touch him and affect him. And for me, it's a relief that he takes a second path, that he's really affected by what's happened. And I love that bit in the middle, even though it's a little bit grim and a little bit troubling, where he reflects on his lack of care. He'd seen the hedgehog before, so he knew that there was a hedgehog in his garden. He'd fed it once, hadn't really taken very much trouble over making sure it was okay or looking after it or anything like that. And then he'd mown his lawn regardless of the fact that he knew that a hedgehog was there, and he bends down to find the hedgehog in the mower. And I think that obviously is symbolic of him humbling himself, coming down to the level of the hedgehog and seeing the world from the perspective that the hedgehog would have been viewing it. And he is undone, really. He puts the word unmendably on its own, on a line with a full stop after it. Now that full stop, without getting too teachery, is called a caesura. It's like a forced stop in a line of poetry, and they're often used to either signify the end of a life or the end of a thought, or to force a pause for reflection. And I think it's doing both things in this poem. So it's obviously the end of the life of the hedgehog, and a forced moment of reflection for the poet or the voice in the poem, whoever it is that's speaking. We trust that it's Philip Larkin. And then again, he could have just got up and gone on with his day and felt bad that he killed a hedgehog, but he doesn't. He allows that moment to make him reflect not just on that moment of killing the hedgehog, but on how to approach life. And thankfully, he draws his conclusion very quickly. And so he talks about the hedgehog, the end of life of the hedgehog, almost as though that hedgehog is an archetype. It's symbolic of all death. And let me just read that last little bit again. He says, the first day after a death, the new absence is always the same. So it's that sense that even though it's just a hedgehog, he wakes up the next day and it's still the thing that he's thinking about. This sad little hedgehog whose life was cut short. And it could have been anything that he killed. it could have been a loved one in his life that had died. It's that sense of loss, that sense of absence. He saw that hedgehog before, but he'll never see it again. And I think there's a poignance to that, but he allows it to teach him. And he finishes with, we should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. So he's reflecting on the fact that he could have really cared for that hedgehog. He could have looked after it. He could have put food out for it. He could have checked the lawn before he'd started mowing, knowing that a hedgehog lived in his garden. But he didn't. He didn't bother. And that lack of care is what he has taken away. That hedgehog needn't have died. And so he's going to resolve to live differently, to be careful of the world around him and be kind while there is time left. So the hedgehog becomes what's known as a memento mori, a sort of reminder of mortality, a reminder that we all too are running out of time. And he resolves to live more carefully while he's still got time to do it. And I think if you're going to kill a hedgehog by accident or by carelessness with your mower, that's a pretty decent outcome if it's going to make you live better as a result, that he becomes more aware. And so this little hedgehog that was so insignificant that he didn't even notice it while he was mowing the grass, the very grass that the hedgehog was sitting on. If that little hedgehog is significant enough to make a change in the way a man lives and behaves, then I think there's a lesson there for us all. So I think even though it's quite a bleak start, it ends in a really hopeful way. I really believe him. I really believe that he's going to live better and be kinder, be more aware. So it's an encouragement really to live with an awareness of the world around us, live in tune with what's happening around us. And I think that can only be a good thing, can't it? So, The Mower by Philip Larkin. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was Rick right? Should I have kept that one to myself? Or do you feel better for having heard it? I'd love to know. Helps me gauge future poems. So, yeah, it really moved me. I found it really moving. The sadness of the loss and then the hope of a changed life and something better and a lesson learnt. And I think any poet that's trying to get us to be kinder to each other gets my vote. What are we thinking so far of the leaves? I love the way that the ripples are working to make the leaves look more realistic. I think that's working a treat. I'm going to change colour. So if that poem was just too sad for you, I've got another one. I might alienate everybody this week if I've got a sad poem about a dead hedgehog and then this one. So this one is a little bit risque. Dare I read it? It's not too bad. How bad can it be? It's about a hedgehog. It's funny, and I'm sure when I show Rick the two poems, he will say, you should have just stuck with this one. But I thought I'd share it because it made me smile. And it's got a very different tone to the last one. So this is by a poet called Graham Jones, who I have to confess I don't know Graham Jones's work at all, but like I say, hedgehog poems are few and far between, and this one came up in my hunt for poems and it made me smile. I thought you might enjoy it as well. So this is called Hedgehog by Graham Jones. Today I saw a hedgehog a funny looking thing. He crept across the lawn outside as I sat watching him. He snuffled through the leaves and grass, his nose twitched like a snake, and then he stopped quite suddenly as he came across a rake. At first he rolled into a ball, quite comical to see, then slowly poked his head out, and I'm sure he winked at me. Once more he turned towards the rake, whose spines looked somewhat higher, and slowly moved toward it with what to me looked like desire. First he nudged it with his nose, then rubbed against the prongs, then getting no reaction, seemed to sense that something's wrong. And then he tried to mount it, but that just came to grief, and shuffled off indignantly, which came as some relief. And so I've learnt a moral from this hedgehog in his teens. Things that we take for granted are not always as they seem. So there we go. Hedgehog who gets more than he bargains for when encountering a rake. So there you go. Hopefully that's cheered you all up. So yeah, the world needs more hedgehog poetry. If you feel inspired, you could have a go at writing one yourself. Put it in the comments. Love to hear your hedgehog poetry. Or if you know of any that are meaningful and worth a read, let me know what you come across, because there's not a lot, and I think hedgehogs are so beautiful and so endangered. We should all be talking about them all the time. I can't remember, I think it's been probably 2 years since I last saw a hedgehog, and it was literally walking along the footpath outside my house after dark, and I followed it at a safe distance because it was heading towards a road, and I was really worried about it, and I was willing to jump in front of cars to make sure it got across safely. So I watched it across the road, make sure it got safely to the other side and into a garden, and then I went back to my house. So that was the last time I saw a hedgehog, and I used to see them all the time, and they're just so endangered, they're so at risk in the UK at the moment, so there must be some charity that is trying to save the hedgehog. I'll have to do some digging around. If I find anything, I'll put a link in the comments. Okay, that's where we're up to. I've stitched on all my leaves, and if I just move it, hopefully you can see some of the texture that pulling on the running stitch has created on the leaves. I think it's working really well. So we're going to add a little bit more decoration next week. I hope you'll come back for that. Thanks so much for watching this week. Really looking forward to seeing what you do with your leaves, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of variety of methods for transferring leaves onto fabric. So really excited to see what you come up with. Do share at hashtag FSH Winging It 24 if you're sharing on Instagram, or you can join our private Facebook group. The details are in the description below, and it's free to join. Just agree to the group rules and I will let you in. Don't forget to tag me at Featherstitch House. Make sure it's in that order, and that way I'm much more likely to see your work. So thanks so much for watching. Enjoy creating your leafy bed for your hedgehog, and I will see you next time. Take care. See you soon. Bye.